All right, everybody, we are live. Everybody, welcome in, welcome in. Today, we are going to be going over the cap situation for your 2022-23 Kings. You can find all of our articles at hockeyroyalty.com. As always, I'm joined by the esteemed Russell Morgan and Joe Paterino. How you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. Just trying to keep up with all the goals that are going on in Stanley Cup playoffs right now. Yes, people have just decided not to play defense anymore.
As we all expected in the East, right?
Yeah, exactly. After that barn burn you had yesterday, you were expecting a little bit more of like a 1-0, 2-1 game today. And, dude, the Rangers looking pretty good. Looking pretty good.
Going away.
Especially with the two top goalies there. So, but before we get into it, let's start the show off. So pretty much the premise of the show, Russell put this together, and I think it's a good topic here. It's going to be, the cap situation. Everybody wants us to go after a big name after getting 2 last season, but the cap might not be as big as we think it is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go on cap friendly and be an armchair GM. We're going to sit in Rob Blake's shoes and see what we can do to this roster and see where we can improve. And so without further ado, let's get this bad boy started.
Yeah, just to kind of tee it up a little bit, if whoever's you guys listening, if you guys aren't familiar with Cap Friendly, I guess just in its entirety, it's really an awesome website where it pretty much describes each team's salary cap situation down to the most minute detail, from player contracts to waiver eligibility to buyout eligibility. I mean, it's got everything. I mean, you see pictures of players signing their contracts, and you'll see the website of Cap Friendly in the background on a GM's computer. So this feature that we're using today is actually called the Armchair GM. It's under the features or interactive tab at the top, and it allows us to pretty much, like Brandon just said, be the GM. So we can, with this feature, we can make trades, we can sign players. Well, and that's pretty much like Brandon just mentioned. We're going to do all that today. We're going to sign all the RFAs that the Kings are going to come back. We're going to look at what UFAs the Kings might be able to sign, which trades they might be able to make, and how that would impact the cap going forward, and the long-term impacts of the salary cap in the next few years too. So we got a lot to go over today, and Brandon, just like Brandon said, it's going to be a great topic for us to discuss.
Let's start with trading for Austin Matthews. How will that work out?
It's a lot of first-round picks.
Yeah. Richard in here already in the chat. Appreciate you, Richard. I'm glad the Oilers lost. I hate them more than Vegas. I think after that series, you might not be the only one.
That's saying a lot from Richard, by the way. That's saying a
lot. Carter Scores comes in here. One big name takes up any major cap space the Kings have. That's what, from some fans, are understanding. That's why it's smart to go for somebody like Marchment instead of Forsberg or Gaudreau. You're after Russell's heart right there with that sentiment. So, without further ado, let's get started here. I'll throw it over to the RFA sheet. Let's pull up the Kings players, and we'll get going.
Yeah, let's scroll down to who the Kings actually have on the salary cap right now, or what the roster actually looks like. So, I mean, this year is actually really interesting from an RFA standpoint, because there are a lot of players that are going to need qualifying offers or need those new kind of bridge deals, I guess we can expect. Obviously, the big name out there is Adrian Kempe. He's going to be commanding a big long-term deal. That's kind of expected after a 35-goal season. But going forward into the future,
oh, there goes.
There's our team. Yeah. So going forward into the future, if you can look right there, there's not that many players that are signed. There's a lot of holes right now. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going over all the RFAs that the Kings need to sign and see how that impacts the salary cap going forward. So if you look, the Kings right now, with all the players unsigned, have around $20 million in cap space total. So that may sound like a lot, and I'm sure a lot of Kings fans are looking at that right now thinking, let's go after that Philip Forsberg. Let's go after that Johnny Gaudreau. That $20 million is going to come down really quickly here, and we'll show you how it does.
All right, it's taking a while to load, I think, on this bigger screen, but we'll get there. RFAs. All right.
So I guess we can just start with the biggest name that the Kings will probably have to sign, which is Adrian Kempe, who will be an RFA after this season. Finished a real breakout year, scoring 35 goals. I guess the first discussion here is what Joe, let's start with you. What do you think is a good, I guess, term money situation? What do you expect the contract to look like?
I think he's getting, at least from a money standpoint, you're probably talking in that 5.5 range. If they can get him for under 6, I think that's a great job by the Kings. But I would probably, just to throw a number out, 5.5, and just kind of ballpark that, maybe 6 years. And I think that's, give or take here, a year and maybe $500,000. I think you could be looking at a contract right around that range. He's probably looking at a $25 to $30 million deal over 5 to 6 years. That's kind of what I'm thinking. And I think he's earned it. And I got no problem if the Kings give it to him. So that's kind of in my head when I'm doing my Armchair GM, when I'm filling out my roster. I'm just throwing 5.5, knowing maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, but I'm throwing 5.5 out there. That's what I'm thinking Adrian Kempe is going to get.
Yeah, that's kind of around the same type of figure I've been guessing. I mean, yeah, it's his first year really putting up those big type numbers where he would command that type of dollar amount, I guess. But I mean, if you're just looking at the potential that he possesses, I mean, he's tall. He's a big guy. I believe at 6'2", 6'3". And he could skate like the wind, second in the fastest skater competition. And we've seen the finishing ability kind of come throughout this year. So, I mean, to be honest, I think 5.5 is a really fair number. I wouldn't be surprised to even see it go up to 6 or even be 5. I mean, we've seen Rob Blake kind of finagle some of these contracts to work in the favor of the Kings.
And here's my take on that. And I know it becomes kind of a fine line sometimes where people get a little uneasy paying for a guy that's done it 1 year. What you have to try to do, and this is why the GMs are going to get paid the big bucks. This is what turns good teams into great teams. You have to sign these guys before they do it. Because if Kempe does this consistently, well, now you're paying him 5 years at $8 million. If you're smart enough and you can see that, okay, this player is developing into what we expected him to, let's get him now. He's only done it once, but we can get him and save $3 million, $2.5, $3 million. That's kind of the name of the game. You look at what the Coyotes did with Clayton Keller a few years back. I think it was Keller, if I'm not mistaken. They signed him to a pretty long-term deal that was a little surprising at the time, but I think he's evolving into a pretty good player. Like you kind of have to take that shot sometimes and get the guy at it. And 5.5 is a good number, I think, for Kempe. And even if he doesn't score 35, if he scores 28, say 29, if he's going to be right around that 30 number, I think you're getting a good deal. So you have to try to pay for these guys before they hit it big. Because when they do, then you're paying 8, 9, 10 million for them.
Exactly. All right, Brandon, you're our GM here. Let's put that pen to paper and see how that impacts the Kings' salary cap.
Let's sign them up.
So we're going for 6 years, $5.5 million. And pretty much, I guess, you can probably just pencil in Kempe to be with Kopitar next season and probably going forward until, however long Kopitar, it seems those two have generated a real good chemistry playing together. So that's going to be something that the Kings will need in terms of helping with scoring. So what does that bring our salary cap to there, Brandon?
Yeah, before we get there, Steve Keegan comes in with kind of a question here. If they trade Kempe for Forsberg's rights, so do you think Kempe would be a trade piece for maybe a more established elite scorer like a Gaudreau or Forsberg, or do you think the value that you're potentially getting, like Joe said, is more the route they're going to take?
I don't think that's I appreciate I think what you have to try to do, and I think that's what Steve's looking at, maybe get a little creative here and to try to make things fit a little bit. And I think that's what you have to do. But I just don't see that a move like that in the cards. No.
Yeah, I'm in the same situation. I mean, the Kings have put in so much work into developing Kempe. I mean, we've kind of all waited for this moment, so for him to be that breakout star to happen. And then for it to finally happen, and then the Kings just trade him away, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I would expect the Kings to really just solidify his position with the franchise for now and going forward into the future. And like the point you just made, Joe, like if you sign him for only like 3 years, let's say he keeps putting up this production, that contract is going to be a lot more expensive in 3 years from now than it would if you just signed him for a long-term deal and try to keep that cap hit down. So I think $5.5 million is a good starting point for him.
All right, so that brings us to 15.1 right now on our team. Let's go back up to the RFAs, and who do we doing next?
RFAs, I think one of the bigger names to come is Mikey Anderson. So, I mean, with Adrian Kempe kind of off the books, that's really kind of gets away from the real big piece, I guess you can say. Now we're kind of just getting to all the younger talent, the ones that really aren't going to command that much of a dollar amount. You're looking at we're going to go over Mikey Anderson, Sean Durzi, Carl Grunstrom, Jared Anderson-Dolan, Gabe Velardi. So there's a lot, and that's why this is a good situation to kind of go over this. So let's start off with Mikey Anderson. Joe, what do you think is a good figure for Mikey?
So this is weird, right? It depends. Are they going to, just kind of trudge him along and sign him to a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, something short like that? Or do they look to sign him to a long-term deal? I think he's a really curious case here because, and I think you had even mentioned on the last live show we did, like, it wouldn't be that surprising if you see the Kings, you wake up one morning, the Kings have signed Mikey Anderson to like a long-term, a 5x5 or a 6-year deal or something like that. Listen, if the Kings think Mikey Anderson is their 1D and Drew Doughty loves playing with him, all signs point to him, the way he's evolved, I will not be the least bit surprised if he at least gets like a 3-year contract at maybe $3.5 million per. I'm almost expecting that more than a 1-year, kick it down the can to next year. That's kind of my thought. I'm thinking he could get that. I mean, this is a similar situation to what I was talking about with Kempe. Now it's a little different because he's younger and more years of an RFA, but you get a guy like this locked in again. So it is a little different, but you pay now rather than him hitting it big. And then all of a sudden you're going to turn a $4 million player. You have to pay double that because he's turned into this big time defenseman. If they see him as a 1D, I think he's probably more suited as a lefty 2 on a really good cup contending team. But I still think that's a really good number. If they pay 3x3 for him, if they do something like that, a kind of a bridge deal, I can see that. I don't know if you kind of agree with that or not, but I'm thinking he's a curious case because they could go a couple different routes with him.
West Coast is saying I think Mikey is going to get a Matt Roy type deal. Matt Roy's making 3.1, so right around where you were talking, Joe.
Yeah. I think that's a good starting point, and I don't think the thing with Mikey Anderson, he's a player where his ceiling's not high and his floor is not low. You know what you're going to get. Like we've probably seen Mikey Anderson. Like Mikey Anderson through this playoffs was outstanding. Yep. I mean, the way he defended. I mean, he was one of the few defenders that looked like he was able to step up to players like McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins throughout the series, and he didn't really look out of place to be in that type of environment in his first NHL playoff experience. So I feel like we've kind of almost seen the potential for Mikey, and you're just kind of seeing that maybe he can grow, get a little bit stronger, and then go from there. So. Yeah, there's that possibility. I would like you said, Joe, I wouldn't be surprised to wake up. Kings signed him to an 8-year deal. It takes him until he's 30 years old. Yeah, that could probably happen. You keep that cap hit down to a certain amount and opposed to just signing him to a 3-year deal and then having to re-sign him after. But I think that Matt Roy deal, I think that's a really good starting point, maybe around $3 million. That could be a little high, but I mean, I was kind of seeing him go around 2.5, but I think $3 million it's probably a safe figure for our little experiment here, just to kind of play it more safe than sorry, I guess. So let's just put that pen to paper and just sign him to maybe a 3-year, $3 million deal. How's that sound, Brandon?
GM's liking it. Let's sign him up.
I love it. I think welcome back to the team, Mikey. Let's take that picture and then we'll post it on the gram.
So Pavel appreciates your sentiment here. Mike Anderson solidified himself as one of the better shutdown D-men in the league, proved it against McDavid. Kempe's bridge deal would be an interesting comparison. Kempe made $2 million. I think we're going to go a mil above that. Richard said 2.5. So, I mean, I could see all those being a range of outcomes, but we're going to play it safe and do a little $3 million just in case, maybe he squeezes a little bit more out of Robbie Blake, or in this case, Rando Commando as the GM, and we give him a little boost.
Yeah, I think, and then so how many defensemen is that on the roster? That's 6 with Sean Walker's scratch there, right? Yeah. Cool.
Although I'm going to say this for whatever it's worth. I don't think Jordan Spence is going to start on the roster next year. It's just my opinion. So I think Durzi. I mean, it's still 6, but I think Durzi slots in and Spence starts in Ontario.
Yeah, you just mentioned his name, so let's just head on over to Sean Durzi and contact that agent, get that contract negotiation started. So Sean Durzi, outstanding breakout first year for him, kind of coming out of nowhere. Probably not going to command that high of a dollar figure from like what we just talked about with Mikey Anderson. I would expect maybe around $2 million for him. I don't think that's too high. I mean that might actually be pretty high compared to, but like I said, we're trying to play it safe here.
And
so
I think
maybe
it's the term
1.5,
too.
yeah.
Like what is the Kings are? We've talked about this right shot D group for a while now. What are they doing with the term for somebody like a Mikey, or excuse me, for a Sean Durzi? Is it a 3-year deal? Takes him till he's 26. Do you sign somebody? You look at what the Bruins did. Do you sign somebody like a Durzi to a team-friendly deal, knowing that he could be, and this is just using Durzi as an example, but that somebody that is going to have to be traded at some point, one of these right shot D, for example, or a left shot D, somebody in the system that you sign him to this deal, but he knowing that he's probably going to get traded in a year or so or whatever it might be. Like it's another interesting case with Durzi, because I don't think anybody expected him to do what he did this year, but it's tough to say he didn't earn a spot on this roster. And earn a raise. So is it the term, Russ? Do you think it's a 3-year thing? Is it a 2-year at 2x2? I get hung up on the term with this, as I just don't know where they decide to go.
Yeah, I don't see it being that high. I envision a bridge deal too for him, maybe like a 2-3 year deal, just to keep that RFA status, that restricted free agent status, to kind of keep him away from becoming an unrestricted free agent where you don't really have any control. So keep that extra year control, bring that term down. I don't envision this contract being too high. So I say $2 million. Even in my head, I'm thinking, man, that sounds pretty high. I can see it being around 1.5. So, I mean, what do you guys think? You think 1.5, 2? What?
Let's split the difference. You want to go 1.8? Split the difference?
That works for me. Let's do that.
All right.
We're great at this negotiating thing. We make these contracts.
These agents are no match for us.
We're going to be starting our own agency group here. So any NHL players that want to have their contracts negotiated by us three knuckleheads, just give us a call.
Everybody watching us is like, well, it's no wonder these guys are not GMs.
Yeah,
exactly.
Westfield Hockey Bite says he thinks Sean Walker could be a comparison for the money. And Carter says 2x2 is what he would guess.
Yeah, that's kind of my throw something at the wall is 2x2.
Mm-hmm. So after those 3 beautiful signings by us, we're at 11.1 mil left to go, and we still need two. We still need 3 forwards and a defenseman.
Yeah, that salary cap, it's getting smaller by the player. Who we got next?
Well, we got another guy that's been made a lot of noise, Carl Grunstrom. Mm-hmm. How much is Carl Grunstrom going to command here? And again, how many years do you pay Carl Grunstrom? They got so many of these guys in these unique spots. I find it really interesting. Like, I think all of us are like, we're on the Grunstrom wagon of saying, yes, we want him back. We think he's earned a spot. We think he's earned a contract. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Right, Russell. So if you're signing Carl Grunstrom today, what is your deal for him?
Well, the player that I compare him to, and it's not about their play style, it's just about the situation they were in when their contract was up. I think it's Blake Lizotte. And you look at what Lizotte just re-signed to. I mean, he like Grunstrom, he earned that contract extension with his play, and he only signed for 1.675. So that's really not that high.
I had 1.5 in my head, and again, I come back to the term, say 2 years at 1.5 is kind of what I'm throwing out there.
That's that's pretty much the exact kind of number I figured him to be too.
Works for this GM. All right, 1.5 to your.
I hope I wake up to a DM from Rob Blake in the morning saying, "Hey, we need you to negotiate some of these player contracts."
You're making this look too easy.
I know. I don't get it. Just let's get the press releases out now. Let's get this offseason going.
Well, because a lot of these guys are going to be offered the qualifying offers, right? So there's a lot of this that, admittedly, I'm not a capologist. I'm not an expert with this. So there's, again, we're saying 2 by 1.5 for Grunstrom. It could be one at what, 950,000 for all we know. I don't really know what those offers look like. So full caveat out there that in as much as it seems like we are not actually NHL GMs. So we're
Wait, what?
Pavel,
way.
Pavel might agree with you. He said, I would guess that Carl accepts his qualifying offer while playing on the third and fourth line as a grinder type player. After he proves himself, he'll likely get a bigger paycheck.
Yeah, and just to kind of go over the qualifying offers for those not familiar, it's pretty much just a 10% bump in the salary from your season pass. So, I mean, that's not unreasonable for a player like Grunstrom, who really didn't come into his own toward the end of the season, and he really made a name for himself in the playoffs. But I mean, there were times where he couldn't really find a spot on the roster. So yeah, I mean,
right.
if I wake up, there's gonna be a lot of stuff going on when I wake up in the morning. But if I see Carl Grunstrom signing, just accepting his qualifying offer and being okay with that, that wouldn't surprise me. Or if I see it a $1.5 million deal for 2 years, that wouldn't surprise me either. So I think right around that middle ground is where we're probably good at. But 1.5, 2 years, I think is great.
So a 10% bump would be, a little less than 900K.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
probably like 925, 950.
Apparently, you can get buy one get one free at Walgreens for All right,
the Hockey Royalty is sponsored by Walgreens. I love it.
So let's kick it over to maybe a more controversial type contract would be Gabriel Velardi.
Yeah, this is another. Yeah, this is another player that is just, there's a lot of question marks, I guess, around him. Is he going to be traded? Where does he fit into the roster going into the season? I think with Velardi, with the season he just had, after pretty much just spending most of it in the AHL, I think this is a player that it would probably just be a qualifying offer that he accepts. I guess to play it more safe than sorry, because it looks like it's around 900,000 where he's at last season. So probably maybe around 975 is what you're looking at, maybe for 2 years, just to kind of keep him. I mean, he's still on a new deal. I think this is just the end of his entry level deal, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, I don't expect this to even really eclipse $1 million. But if we're playing it safe, maybe 1 million is the number.
Yeah, I just and as you do this, Randon, because you sign him here and then you go back to the roster. Where do we? Because now we've signed a few forwards. We can kind of start to piece a lineup together and see, okay, now where are the Kings missing and where does Velardi fit? Like, I have a lineup that I just don't, and I'm the biggest probably Velardi fan there is. I don't know where he fits because I don't know where the Kings. I've said it before. I just wonder if his future is with this organization because I don't see the fit. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's dealt this summer, but we'll see. I think we can start to look too, Brandon, when you do that. What do the lines start to look like as we've signed now Velardi, we've signed Anderson, we've signed Grunstrom. What are we looking at?
Yeah, let's bring up a couple comments before we get into that. It says, incredible last year, Grunstrom led the Kings in hits with only 54 games and 12 minutes per night. Little AKA Brownie Jr. there. Then they're getting into Carter agrees with us that Velardi should be whatever the qualifying offer is. And West Coast is a little worried that we should have traded Velardi last summer. Now he's basically Elias Anderson. If we can get a top goalie prospect for him, he's beating down the goalie prospects. I'd do that in a heartbeat. But let's look at the lineup with Gabriel in there. Let's start him right winger one.
I like it.
Joe would love it.
Hey, I'm not opposed to that either. I mean, if Gabe Velardi opens the season next year as the right wing one, I wouldn't say that's you just want to see him be put in a spot where he's going to be able to succeed, and you're just kind of banking on the fact that he's going to have a great offseason, a good training camp, good preseason, and then be able to step up. I mean, last year he was on one of the best lines in the preseason, so if he can get up to that level again where he was at last preseason before that line all pretty much fell apart, I think that'd be a great spot for Velardi, maybe just starting out in the first line and just seeing what happens.
So if we take a quick step back here, if you look at this roster, this is exactly what we're talking about is the only spot you could see, okay, they're going to make a move is I don't know that Velardi's going to start at right wing one, right? So I think that I would imagine they're going to try to keep the Dano, Moore, and Arbison line together. Byfield, Kaliev, and Alex Iafallo is not going to play in the fourth line, so I think he's a fit there just naturally. Grunstrom, Lazat, Kapari, again, that just seems like a natural fit. We hadn't even talked about Jared Anderson-Dolan, who I'm a big fan of. We haven't talked about, what do we do with Brendan Lemieux? Does he come back? I think we've all but said, and I think we're kind of saying it without saying it, Athanasiou, we don't envision coming back. We don't envision Elias Anderson being in the picture. So I think you're kind of looking at the roster here before we make any additions. At least as a forwards. I mean, I think, and actually most of those defensemen too. So it's like you see quickly, and I don't know what's the cap space look like here, Rando. I know we got a couple
8-6.
Yeah, and I know we've got a couple more RFAs to get signed because I don't think we have any scratches accounted for yet. So
but that's only 20 on the out of the 23-man roster.
Yeah, exactly. So there's 3 more names that need to get signed here. So
I guess we could just start playing around right now. I mean, in terms of looking toward free agent signings
because listen, you're looking at what Moverari, I think is going to come back. You're looking at guys that are making.
I would say Jad and Mavori would probably be the extra.
Yeah, that's what I had. So you're probably looking at what? So take that $8 million down to 6.5. 7. Like I don't think there's not big money. I don't think coming into this. So you can ballpark
an 8.5.
I would put him at just 9.5 maybe. I think the qualifying offer is probably around 9.
Okay. So we went into this with 20+ million in cap space and thinking that we're loaded, but really you have the cap space of one. You get a legitimate player for $6.5-7 million, but now you're up against it. So really, if the Kings are going to be adding, and we've talked about the Kings needing a top 6 forward and a lefty, well, it's going to be really tough to add 2 guys when you don't have but $7 million worth of cap space. Which and as we've talked about, we'll get into it here, as you just said, Russ. $7 million ain't going to sign you Phil Forsberg.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for those that are really on the Forsberg train, this is kind of what I wanted to show off a little bit is that, look, we just signed all the major RFAs that we pretty much expect to come back next season to the Kings. And there is only $6.9 million in cap space. So yeah, that's not going to sign you a Forsberg or a Gaudreau. That's not going to get you anywhere with those. So I would expect. Yeah, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect most of the additions to be made probably via trade. I think you're going to have to probably move some money out and to try to bring in that high-end talent that you're looking for.
Yeah, but what I was saying is the trade might be the answer here. A lot of people talking about the right side and how deep it is. Sean Walker's 2.6 mil on top of the 7 mil we have. 9.6 would be enough to get a Forsberg or a Gaudreau. Is that an option there, considering that Spence played his way into a potential role with the team? And then we haven't talked about the perennial number 1 or first overall pick in Brent Clark making the roster as well. So is Walker's 2.6 the easiest to move because they don't really need the pick, so they can really pretty much take anything in return for that salary cap dump?
I don't know if it's the easiest to move or not. Maybe it is. I just keep going back to what we talked about before. And I know, Randon, you did have an interesting take on this, but man, I just thought it was really interesting that Blake made it a point to name Sean Walker as somebody that he plans on being a part of the roster. I don't know. I found that a little surprising. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm reading way, way too much into that, but yeah, the Kings could probably use that $2.5 million, to, even if it's not Forsberg, just to give them a cushion to go get whoever else. So I don't know. I would agree, Randon, with you, but I'm kind of taking the approach that at Blake at his word right now, that obviously things can change. So I'm not going to hold a gun to his head, but it was interesting that he said that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the thing with Rob Blake is that when he says something, you really have to listen, because he doesn't say a lot in terms of putting out the feelers for player movement or free agent signings. You don't really hear. I mean, we hear the rumors, but no one saw Philip Deneau coming. No one saw Victor Arvidsson coming. Alex Edler coming. Nobody expected that to come. So when Rob Blake makes a statement like that, you really have to listen and be like, okay, if he's really talking about Sean Walker in that high of a regard, then you have to expect him to come back next season. And the thing that I think about too, I mean, because I've been this has happened to me when I've been working around with this feature is, yeah, you can trade Walker and he's got a $2.16 million or $2.1 million contract, but you're going to have to replace him with somebody. And that somebody that you're replacing him with isn't going to be free. So let's say you replace him with Brant Clark, who carries a $900,000 deal. You're saving yourself $1.2 million. So you're not really saving yourself or getting away from like some big $6 million contract. And Sean Walker was a good player and is a really good player, offensive player that the Kings desperately need on the blue line. So I think you have to look at this defensive lineup right now and really think this could be the defensive lineup the Kings open the season with next year.
Well, let me ask you this. Looking at these, and it may take us a little off track, or you steer us back where we need to, but I'm just curious. Looking at the roster as we've constructed here, let's take the assumption that the Kings are probably going to be able to add one, I'll say, impact player. That's not to say they can't add a solid piece elsewhere too, but say that impact player, whether it's a top line forward or a top 4D, left D, we'll say. Where do you think they should? Who are they going to get? Would you prefer that be a forward in this case, looking at this lineup right now, or would you prefer that be a defenseman? So when I say defenseman, well, let's just throw some names out there and have a little fun with it. Mm-hmm. Jacob Chychrun's obviously one. Tampa Bay's in an interesting cap crunch themselves, and they've got two left shot D that are signed for a long term in McDonough and with Hedman. And if you can find a way to pry Mikhail Sergachev out of there, I think I would be really interested in that. Is Travis Sanheim out of Philly? So there's a few defensemen. Do those sound better than a Kevin Fiala, Jacob DeBrusk forwards? Like the way I look at this, I'll just give you my opinion, and then you take it from here. I'd rather play with the forwards we've got, these young forwards, the Velardis, the Kalievs, the Kaparis. We've got Anderson Dolan who can come in. We've got Fagemo who could come up. excuse me. I want the Kings to go after that blue line because I don't think that's good enough. That blue line is not good enough. That's my take.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's kind of where, and it's not just, I mean, the blue line isn't good enough now. I mean, Brant Clark will grow into what we think will be a good player. But if the Kings are going to make that next step, there needs to be that impact player to come on that left side. And that's where I go back to Jacob Chychrun. So, I mean, and the thing with that people have to realize is that these players, you can't just look at their production or the type of player they are. You have to look at these players that are available for trade and look at their contracts, because contracts are going to be a huge commodity in terms of looking for trades now, because the way the salary cap is going, I mean, it's only going up $1 million next year, and who knows what's going to happen after that. I mean, you don't really know how much you have to play with. I mean, usually I was talking to Rand about this the other day. I mean, usually you go into the offseason and every team usually expects, like, okay, let's see what player they can add to improve the team. Well, now that the salary cap isn't going up, all these teams now are just trying to figure out who they can just bring back at this point. So you have to be able to find those players that are on those smaller type cap hit deals to bring in that can be impactful. And I think that's why Jacob Chychrun would be a great addition for the Kings. Luckily, we have our GM here, Randon, who's probably going to negotiate some trade deals. So let's see what would a Jacob Chychrun deal look like, and how would that impact the salary cap? What's a good starting point, you think, for Chychrun? Like, there's been that talk of 4 first rounder or first round type players, picks, whatever. What would you envision for that package?
If I'm throwing it out there just to start, it's the first round pick this year. It's Alex Turcotte and it's Gabe Velarde. That's probably where I'm starting. In terms of, like, that's what I'm expecting the Kings would have to lose. And I would throw in Tobias Bjornfot. I think Bjornfot in this deal is attractive enough. You get 3 really young pieces if you're Arizona frankly, two of them can play in the NHL right now, and a healthy Turcotte, I think, can play in the NHL. It doesn't matter where he plays. So you're really kind of pumping some young blood into that system. Not to mention the first round pick this year. Is that steep? Maybe it sounds steep, but I think
that's four first round assets.
Yeah, I and maybe instead of both of Turcotte and Velardi, it's just Bjornfoot a first, one of them, and then somebody else. Maybe it's a lower level, a Madden or something like that. But I think that's probably what you're going to have to plan for is Bjornfoot a first, and I would say Turcotte and Velardi. That's I don't know where that lands for you guys or as Kings fans if they balk at that, but. I think, I've talked about this before. You got to be careful hugging your prospects. I mean, I think it was a blasphemy to think of trading Gabe Velardi, even for an impact player. I mean, the idea of trading Velardi and Turcotte together in a deal for Jack Eichel was laughed at last summer. And now look at the statuses of Velardi and Turcotte. I think it's crazy to not do that. And I think it's crazy to not consider that when you're talking about a defenseman, and you just laid it out perfectly, Russell. You're seeing the contract situation. You're seeing how tight the cap gets. You've got a guy that's going to be signed for the next 4 or 5 years at sub 5, right? It's 4.8, I think he makes. Is that right? Am I accurate in that?
He makes. I have it right here. He makes
4.6.
Yeah.
So that, that's a no-brainer because I mentioned Sergachev, and I think right now he's at 4.8, but he's due to have a contract. And while he's a couple years younger, you're going to have to sign that guy. He's got one more year at an RFA. You're probably going to have to sign him for more than 4.8. That's for sure. So 4.6. So I am really enticed by Chychrun because of the age, the position, and the contract. So I think he still, for me, is my number one target.
Yeah, I think that package that you put together, I think that's pretty much right around what I was thinking. Maybe the Kings can get away with keeping Velardi. I think you probably have to throw in Turcotte. You have to throw in Bjornfoot. I mean, and the thing is, when you make the trade, you have to make it attractive. You have to think. I always think about if I was a Coyotes fan, would I be happy with this trade?
Exactly.
And if you think about it, like, okay, I'm getting an impact player that I'm going to watch play now in Bjornfoot, who's already has 100 games under his belt. And he's 21 years old.
Yep.
And he was a defensive partner with Victor Soderstrom, who's one of their top end defensive prospects in the Swedish World Juniors. So, I mean, there's a lot you can kind of appease to the fans there, whatever fans they have over there. And then Alex Turcotte add to that too. That's a really good haul. And you add a first round pick, a 19th overall pick, and a second round pick. That's probably where I'm getting at, and I think that's probably around because if you think about it, like I've talked about this multiple times. The Kings are on the same trajectory they were right around 2010, 2011, 2012. They were making the playoffs 2010, 2011. Then they made that big trade for Mike Richards. They traded their 5th overall pick in Braden Shen and Wayne Simmons, Wayne Simmons was a beloved player in LA. Everybody loved Wayne Simmons. And then to trade Braden Shen, a player you just drafted 5th overall, that's a lot to give up, but look what you got out of it. So
exactly,
you have to pay a price.
It has to hurt. A trade like that, a lot of times, is going to sting. It is, so.
And I think why the Kings can make this trade now is because if you look at their roster, if they lose players like Velardi, Bjornfoot, and Turcotte, I mean, they still have a solid core being built right now with young players like Byfield, Kaliev, Trevor Moore, Philip Deneau's going to be around a while. Yep. I mean, Blake Lazat, Carl Grunstrom. I mean, these are
why
all
you build up It's why you build up the assets.
Exactly. And if you look at the top, what would the top 4 be for the next 3 years? You have Mikey Anderson, Drew Doughty, Jacob Chychrun, and Matt Roy as your top 4. Not to mention Brant Clark whenever he's ready, Jordan Spence, and Sean Durzi. So
Faber still, they'll list them off exactly.
I mean, this is going to hurt, but this is only going to put a dent in the prospect pool.
Exactly. You have. I mean, it is what it is.
So we're going with four first round assets is what we're going with.
Yep. I say we call it Bill Armstrong and just make that trade now. Send it to NHL Central Registry and just make it happen.
Quit screwing around and just make the deal.
Yeah,
And this,
exactly.
I want to throw this around too. I want to say this too, and I'm guilty of it. Okay, we all are, but we all overrate our own prospects. Now, in fairness, the Kings have a very highly rated prospect pool by experts as well, but we don't know how the Arizona Coyotes, in this example, views Tobias Bjornfot. They may see those 100 games and like, guys, he ain't an NHL player. Maybe they don't want him. We're thinking that's a good fit for them. But you have to remember, and I think you're right, Russ, you have to try to put yourself in that other team's shoes. And if you're a rebuilding team, you've got an asset at 4.6 for 5 years. He's a young left shot D. Shoot, you better ask for the moon. You better. And I think if there's a team like the Kings that can pay for it, if they legitimately want to take that next step, you go do it.
Absolutely.
We have a couple comments here. They said Turcotte says use Bjornfot as a trade chip there. Then JW says way overpayment. AZ would be ecstatic. Anyway, I think a score is the bigger need.
We would be ecstatic too. That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
We're addressing a really big hole.
When we're talking about
Richard says Arizona fans are future Quebec Nordique fans. That's a little jab there.
Love it.
And then, but what about West Coast's idea here? He said, I like the trade idea, Joe. Why don't we try to save our first rounder and swap a known commodity like Fagemo, Madden, Grunz, Akil Thomas, etc.
It's one thing for me or us to say that. What does Arizona want? I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona rather the pick. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona says, I don't want this year's pick. I want next year's pick.
Yeah.
So I see.
And we were talking with, not to cut you off there, Joe, but we were talking with Wheeler this morning, and that interview has not been published yet. But he said the drop off in this draft is roughly around the 10 to 12 mark. But he said next year there's 2 players that would definitely be drafted higher than Wright, and that top tier talent is somewhere in the 15 to 22 range before it drops off. He said this draft could mimic 2015, and so would Arizona value a 2023 pick? Because if you're looking out here right now, if it scrolls up and lets me go up there for them, look at, they already have 3 first round picks this year and 4 in the second.
Welcome to the Arizona Coyotes NHL draft.
Yeah,
exactly. I think
maybe 2023 might be the thing.
I think the first round pick is the 2023, maybe because it's a 2023. You can swap out Russ, like you were saying, one of those other prospects, and maybe it's not Velardi, maybe it's Madden. I don't know how that part would work. Maybe they value that higher so we can save a little bit on a prospect. So I think I like the idea, West Coast hockey, but my guess is that Arizona would prefer the pick. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they would prefer one of those guys. My guess is they would prefer the pick.
No, I would agree with that too. You would expect them to want a little bit of control over a certain asset that they get in this trade. I mean, and yeah, if they add a first round pick, if they make the first round pick that they trade over next year, I think that's going to even sweeten the deal even more. And I think that kind of would put it over the edge. I mean, we're already talking about an overpayment, but yeah, it's going to hurt. These trades that you want to acquire this elite level talent, a player like Jacob Chychrun who led the all defensemen in goals 2 years ago for a team that desperately needs goal scoring from the blue line, you're going to have to pay for it. And I think this is the payment that the Kings would have to make.
All right, well, let's see what it would look like. Trade in the books. Oh, no more first round pick. So there we go. Opens it up a little bit, but then Chychrun swaps up here, and that's kind of what you're looking there as far as for the team. And now we need a forward, and we have 4.1 million cap space.
So something to keep in mind. So the Kings we just traded the Kings first round pick. That probably means you're not acquiring a forward like a Kevin Fiala's going to demand a first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're not acquiring Kevin Fiala. Now you're not getting both. So that's kind of my whole thing in this is I don't think the Kings are getting two necessarily impact pieces. I think if they add a defenseman, I think that forward could be a complementary or a Mason Marchment who you can get maybe a little bit more under the radar cheap, and you're buying low. Well, actually, no, they're kind of buying high, but you're buying at a where he is right now to try to extend him out and maybe give him a big deal at a good number. Because So like you just said, Randy, you got 4 and change cap space. That's a tough. You'd have to look around and start because I think Fiala is going to be more, DeBrusque is going to be more. Or DeBrusque, was it just 4 actually? The DeBrusque guy, I think that was a $4 million deal he signed. So that one could fit under. That one is one that could fit under. Again, don't know what he commands though. Did the Bruins want a first round pick for Jake DeBrusque?
Yeah, I think he could. I mean, it depends on where it's at, but yeah, I think he could. The thing is, if you made that Fiala trade, he needs a new contract, and there's been talks he could be around $6.5-7 million a year. So if the Kings made that deal, they'd be right up against the cap with just bringing in one player. And would Kevin Fiala really put this team over the top going into next season? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, it would be if they could do Kevin Fiala and Jacob Chychrun. I think that comes pretty close to getting them. But as you just said, that's tough to do with the current cap space, where there's not money to do that. So I think this is kind of and I'm glad we're doing this exercise because we're seeing you add one impact piece that you've traded a boatload of assets for, even if he is at a good number, like Chychrun's at a really good number, you're not adding a second piece.
Yeah.
That's that, impact. I mean, unless you're going to be able to get, so let's talk about your guy here. Mason Marchment.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's get to some. I got to do ad read for real quick because we got our wonderful sponsors here at DraftKings. So the ad read here is hockey fans in the pursuit of the Stanley Cup is on, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, has an unbelievable offer for the most exciting playoff in sports. New customers can bet $5 on any team to win and get $150 in free bets, no matter what, win or lose. Looking to turn a small bet into a big payday during playoffs? With DraftKings same-day parlays, you can do just that. Create your own parlay by combining multiple bets, like which team will win, how many goals will be scored, and more. It is your shot at even a bigger payout. DraftKings is safe, secure, reliable. Best of all, you can deposit and withdraw whatever cash you want. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code THPN. Bet $5 on any NHL team to win and get $100 in free bets no matter what. That's code THPN at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions may apply. See show notes for details.
Yeah, I think before we get back into this, I think we should all just say congrats to Andrei Kopitar, who took home the Mark Messier NHL Leadership Award just before we came on here. So that's a little bit of a surprise, but I think that was well deserved for Captain Kopi.
Pleasantly surprised when all of a sudden I look up and there's Kopitar on the TV. That was awesome. So really cool. Really
I was
cool.
listening to Mark Messier read that, and then all of a sudden I look up and I'm like, "Whoa, that's Kopitar's name."
As I'm, and I didn't even. I put this on before the award was announced. This is the old school. I don't know if anybody ever got into Anze's 11. He had a clothing brand. I don't know if he still does, but I bought this was years ago.
I remember that.
Years ago. And I'm like, go figure. He wins it as I put the shirt on.
The website was like AK11 or something like that.
He changed the logo to then it became this AK11, but the original was this kind of sleek looking 11 in cursive, which I
that's awesome.
So good for him. Awesome.
Carter Scores comes in here and says, do you think Provorov is an option for Blake if he can't land Chychrun? Do you think he would be cheaper? Obviously I think he's at $6 million when last time I looked. So he's not cheaper by the cap space, but do you think he'd be cheaper in the acquisition price?
Yeah, cheaper in the acquisition price, definitely. But I mean, like we just talked about, is that a player that you want to bring in at $6.75 million for 3 more years? Yeah, I don't know if Provorov really puts things over the top in terms of the defense. I mean, yeah, he's a big body and he can skate really well, but in terms of looking for impact, I think Chychrun is the way to go if the Kings do make that big move for the blue line.
I always like the idea of Provorov more than real life Provorov. I don't know what it is. I've always expected a little bit more from him and just haven't seen it. And for that money, no thanks.
Yeah.
JW comes in here. Get somebody from AZ on the next live talk. We will definitely try to do so. We have enough D. We need a scorer like Fiala. But if you look at the people that are signed to contracts right now, I mean, we don't have a lot of D coming up in the wings on the left side.
No.
And we do have a lot of scoring potential coming in right here. So I think that the acquisition for a defenseman might be more likely and make a more immediate impact. Let's go here. Chychrun would have led the Kings in goals 2 years ago as a defenseman. So it would be like almost getting a forward.
Mhm.
I want to stick on that for a quick second. I think that's a really good point, because I think that, and you're seeing in these playoffs sometimes, these defensemen, and I'm not to say that Chychrun is Makar or Chychrun is Fox, but you're seeing what these offensive type of defensemen can provide to the goal scoring and to a power play or to the offense, for example. Like, it would be a big deal to have a guy like that, and he would help the forwards, he would help the offense inherently. So yes, the idea of bringing in the big sexy forward is always going to look way more exciting and way better, but let's not underestimate the idea of bringing in a slick skating, puck moving defenseman that can provide offense from the blue line to be just as effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think he would help out our special teams. And Rich comes in here and said if our special teams was just 15th, middle of the pack, we would have made the Western Conference Finals. Hopeful Lee comes in here and says if we trade Iafallo, the Chychrun acquisition is barely an impact on our cap. Just a thought. Do you think that Iafallo could be a trade piece? Maybe not for Arizona. I think Arizona's tearing it down to the studs, and they want to get as young as possible. But, maybe for another scorer or a top six winger, do you think Iafallo and his $4 million cap is a bargain? Or do you think T-Mac just loves him too much and he ain't going anywhere?
I saw this mentioned in our Hockey Royalty Discord. And for those that are listening, we have a Hockey Royalty Discord. Come in, join the chat. It's a lot of fun. And this was actually brought up last week sometimes. I don't know, Russ. I think Iafallo is a really, really, really good hockey player. I think he's a really good guy to have on your team. I think he's a really good guy to have as a penalty killer. I think he's a great third line forward who, in a pinch, if you need him to play higher up, he can. But I don't know that I want to see that guy out the door. I think he's a solid glue type of guy that you have on the roster. But it is a very interesting point that he is a forward that's probably a third line forward that's making $4 million. That is there a taker for him that could free up some space? It's an interesting point. I would be surprised. What do you think?
No, I would. I mean, the thing Iafallo this year was so weird for him. It felt like, and maybe he was one of those players toward the end that was playing with that shoulder injury. I believe it was 3 players that were mentioned that had one. So who knows if that was a huge impact on his game a little bit? Because, I mean, as soon as from 2021, Iafallo was great. 2022, Iafallo just kind of was not great. Put it lightly. It's just yeah. Could I see him being traded? Yeah, I could see that. I mean, $4 million, that's a hefty paycheck for a player that's kind of being played in the middle six right now. If you're looking to upgrade and make some scoring, bring in some scoring talent. But the thing with Iafallo is that I think I don't know, maybe we haven't really seen his full potential. I know he's 28 years old right now. So yeah, you would hope he'd get there sooner rather than later, but it's tough because that seems like a player that the Kings like to have on their team, that kind of grinder type, forechecking type player who's willing to do it all. And we've heard all the accolades that Andrzej Kopitar has given him in terms of wanting to play with him. But I mean, with the way he was playing with Kopitar throughout the end of the season, it just didn't work. So maybe that is a player that gets moved out. But
yeah,
I
don't think you look at him as being an older player. So a rebuilding team isn't going to want him.
No.
Yeah.
And then a cup contending team, do they have $4 million in cap space for a middle six player? And that's what he would be like if he plays for Tampa right now. He's a bottom six. Yeah. So they don't have the space for that kind of thing. So I think he's in an interesting position there. But Carter Scores is coming in and saying we should just trade our whole team for Cale Makar. And I don't think that would be enough either. That kid is ridiculous.
That's the thing where you look at like an Iafallo, maybe he is like what would be a piece for, let's say, a Kevin Fiala, where it's not a player that Minnesota would be able to keep at around $6.57 million, but you give him a player like Iafallo who can kind of play a little bit like Fiala, but then you get Fiala back, so you're kind of moving out some money to bring some money in. Yeah, maybe that could be a possibility, and it would probably keep that trade down a little bit too.
Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. We have some questions here about a D-man that we talked about briefly in the chat here, and they're talking about Brandt Clark, in response to the Cale Makar. He's been deadly, but that's why we have Clark. So Clark can only play in NHL or OHL next season. He's clearly better than the OHL. Even if he has a subpar camp, doesn't he at least come in as a 7th D-man? And so we talked about that before we get to Marchment. I mean, in order for that to happen, this guy's got to leave. And
Mhm.
whether we trade him for just like a lot of picks or to a team that like just an extra piece, because right, like say in this Chychrun deal, if we included Sean Walker and then gave up an extra draft pick for them to take that salary cap dump, like is that something that you see happening in order for this guy right here, Brant Clark, to make the roster?
Well, I mean, I don't really see it happening. And let's say we didn't even make the Chychrun trade. I mean, you already had 7 defensemen there
Mhm.
with Sean Durzi and Jordan Spence. And Jordan Spence is on the AHL roster. So where is Brant Clark going to play? I mean, we just talked about how Rob Blake praised Sean Walker, so it doesn't really feel like he's going anywhere. I don't know. Brant Clark, I would.
I don't think there's a player. I don't think Sean Walker is a player that would prevent Brant Clark from making the roster. If Clark has the camp that we think he can, and he comes in and is that excellent piece, like you don't restrict a guy from making the roster, right? Our goal this season is to get better than 99 points. So you want to put the best roster out there. I think if he has an excellent camp, he probably gets 9 games minimum at that point.
I'm of the opinion that I would be just very surprised if he's back in the Ontario Hockey League next year. I cannot imagine him not being in the NHL. And it creates a situation for us that we're talking about here that where the hell does he fit? But I think they find a way to make him fit. And I don't know who the odd man out is. But I think they find a way to make him fit if he's as good as advertised.
Let's say that the Kings didn't make the Chychrun trade, and you have Bjornfot on the roster still. With we can pretty much talk about how Anderson, Doughty, and Roy are pretty much the only three, I guess, solidified spots on the blue line right now. I mean, the 3 other spots are kind of up in the air right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Walker, I think his added benefit is his versatility. And I think his ability to be able to play the left side is what's going to help him out even more. So if you move Walker to play on the left side with Roy, that brings Bjornfot down to the third defensive spot and leaves Durzi open. And then maybe you can have Durzi switch to the left side, bring Bjornfot down, and bring Clark up. The only problem is now you have 4 right shot defensemen and only 2 left shot defensemen. So the right shot defense is a big question mark for the Kings right now.
I wouldn't be surprised if Durzi's, if it could sound crazy, I just because of these numbers, like I wouldn't be surprised if Durzi's in Ontario to start the season. I don't think that's out of the question until things get a little bit, maybe more sorted. And I think that's kind of a tough break for him because he showed so well. But it's a numbers game right now. And barring somebody going out, I think he could be the odd man out, and he starts in Ontario.
Yeah, that could be a possibility too. It's just I think fans and the team maybe got really high on Durzi after what he was able to provide throughout this whole season. And like you said, right, like rightfully so. I mean, it seemed like he was a real glue guy in the locker room too for the team. So I don't know, maybe that helps this case. And I think Durzi is a big name to watch this offseason to see what the Kings do with him.
And Bjornfot, and we've seen Rob Blake I think everybody was like pretty surprised that Anderson Dolan didn't start the season, but because he was waivers, he exempt. Yeah. It was an easy one to send down. Bjornfot's waiver is exempt, so depending on what they do, he's an easy one to send down. From a contractual standpoint, of course, easy to send down. But interesting discussion. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No.
Nav comes in and says, I see both Durzi and Spence back in the AHL.
So do I.
They were good, but need more seasoning. And then Richard with a joke here. Nothing wrong with making them a little more crispy.
Yeah, I think if you start Durzi and like Brandon was talking about, give Brant Clark those 9 games to just get his feet wet in the NHL before that entry-level contract kicks in. Then you can kind of really see if he really impresses, then you made the right decision. Just keep him around. And if just bring that offense that he's able to bring that the Kings desperately need. I mean, we have this hypothetical trade in here with Jacob Chychrun, but I mean, if there wasn't that trade, you bring Brant Clark up and you have him playing alongside Sean Walker, who's on the left side with Bjornfot, Roy, and then Anderson and Doughty. I mean, maybe you get a little bit of a spark with Clark in the lineup, who that's pretty much has been his game, is his offense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get to some free agents here, Marchment, before we went and had our wonderful message from DraftKings. Let's take a look at the UFAs.
I would love. So Russ, you have been on the Marchment, leading the Marchment, wagon. What are we signing him for? What does his contract look like? Because this is a guy, like, if you think about it, kind of out of nowhere. He's not that young, and he's coming off a big year. What does this contract look like?
Yeah, and that's the big thing is this is a player that was in the AHL just, I believe, at the beginning of this last season, and then came up and played on a Florida Panthers team that was scoring 5 goals a night. So everyone was saying, oh, he's just playing on a high productive offense like the Panthers, playing with some great players. But that wasn't really the case. I mean, if you look at all of his analytic numbers, I mean, he's leading the team in on-ice expected goals and relative on-ice expected goals. So when he's off the ice, the team is scoring less goals than he would be on the ice. I mean, it's just hard to kind of explain it. But, yeah, so there's a lot more in-depth that you can kind of look at his stats and be like, okay, this guy isn't just playing on a good team. He's actually being a good individual producer. So when you're talking about his contract, I've kind of hover around the figure around $3.5 million. So that's kind of why I'm always kind of harping on, hey, Marchment. And it's not even about his individual production, his production this past season. You go back to the Toronto Marlies. The Toronto Marlies won the Calder Cup championship. I forget what year it was, a couple years ago, 3-4 years ago. And on that team was Trevor Moore, Carl Grunstrom, and Mason Marchment. And Mason Marchment and Trevor Moore played on the line with, I believe his name's Adam Brooks. I might be wrong there, but Brooks was the centerman on that line. And they led, I believe, the AHL in Corsi percentage throughout the entire season. So when you can have those two have that chemistry, have that locker room kind of friendship already built, and you bring him in at that type of deal, that's kind of why I'm leading this wagon right here for Marchment to come to LA.
Shoot, and that's the thing, like this is how you get to impact players, is you go make that deal for Chychrun in the example we're giving. I've used, again, if you want to throw in Sanheim or you want to throw in Sergachev, or pick your impact left shot D, you make that trade, and then this is who you go get to potentially do it, because you're not going to be able to afford anybody else. But you might be able to afford Mason Marchment if you are willing to give him, a 6x4, 7x4. Say, you know what, we're going to commit to you. Here's a long-term deal for, if they wanted to do that. But the thing is with him, that takes him into his mid-30s. So it's if they want to go that route. But I'm all in on this, because if it works, you've got a gem at a good price. And if it doesn't, I don't know that the floor is like he falls off the map and he's back.
Yeah.
I just don't think you go from the way he played analytically to a nothing. So I love it. I love it. And I think I would rather them go this route and get that big D, try to go, for lack of a better term, bargain hunting up front, but do it wisely and see if you can get this Mason Marchment or a player of his ilk, because there's not a lot out there free agent wise. Like, there's a lot of old free agents that are really, don't get me wrong, really good players, right? You're studs, but they're up there that are going to command money the Kings don't have. There's going to be a bidding war for Forsberg. There's going to be so many teams after him, and it just never seems like the Kings get that guy over the years, that free agent. So I'm not going to hold my breath on Forsberg unless he really, really, really is a big fan of Victor Arvidsson, then maybe. But I just don't know that I'm going to see that happening. So I think it's a trade, or it's somebody like a Marchment.
Yeah, and Pavel comes in here and said agrees with you guys. Marchment finished third in the NHL in goals for versus goals against ratio. Notably had a $9.6 million market value for his play this season.
Yeah, and the one thing, I say $3.5 million, and I think that's a fair number for him because of his really just 1 year in the NHL. And to throw a player like that much money at a player who's only got 1 year under his belt in the league, who's at 27 years old, I think that's a fair figure. But I'm looking at teams like Buffalo, Anaheim, Seattle, these teams that have the cap space that can look at a player like Marchment and be like, hey, we'll pay you $5 million a year for the next 5 years. I don't see him turning that down. So that would be the only cap. I wouldn't pay Marchman more than $4 million a year. That's the thing. Is I'm stopping there.
Yep.
And because I mean, like we just talked about, the cap situation isn't as abundant as we kind of figure it to be. So you have to keep these contracts small when you're bringing these players in.
The other thing that I was playing around with and just trying to think outside the box, because we've talked about how so many times it's always the common names that are talked about, but that's rarely whatever ends up happening, especially with the Kings. We talked about Danault and Arvidsson. Nobody saw those coming. And I tried to think a little bit outside the box, and I looked at Montreal because of the Marc Bergevin connection. And there's two players that are forwards. Again, I'm not saying that I endorse these, but just two things that came in mind. You've got a team that's clearly looking to rebuild, and they have cap problems. If the Kings envisioned Josh Anderson as a top 6 forward, obviously this means you're not getting Chychrun, but if they go forward route, if they envision Josh Anderson as a top 6 forward, he signed to a long-term deal at, again, if you buy him being that forward at a decent number, I think he's at $5 million. I don't know that I do. I was a big fan of Josh Anderson's, but he hasn't really played all that well. I liked his game, but it just hasn't been there. So I don't know that he's a fit. Or you want to talk about a guy that helps goal scoring? You want to talk about a guy that helps a power play? Mike Hoffman will do both of those things. He is an elite sniper. I think he's got 1 year left. Again, I'm just throwing names that are a little bit outside the box, but Mike Hoffman, I mean, there's few goal scorers as good as he in the NHL. You get him with a center like Danault or like a Kopitar, and you put him on the power play, and he is absolutely lethal. So
Hoffman's 2 by 4.5, and Anderson was 5 by 5.5.
Yeah, they just signed Anderson to that long deal. So I think that's a bit of I certainly wouldn't do Anderson. The Hoffman thing is interesting just because of the Kings, they haven't had a shooter like that in a long, long time. So just a couple names that I wonder if you got a team like Montreal who's looking to A, shed salary, B, get younger. And I think these could be cheap options because of their money. But I would pass on Anderson. I'd be intrigued at Hoffman just because of how well he shoots the puck.
Yeah, I think with Anderson too is I believe Marc Bergevin signed that deal.
That's what I'm saying.
So, yeah, there's a little bit of that Montreal connection there.
That's why I went there. Yeah.
I mean, Hoffman, he's been known as the power play specialist, and that's kind of what the Kings did. It seems like they kind of lean more toward the 5v5 type player. But to think out of the box, that's kind of what the Kings, and that's why I got so excited over Vladimir Tkachev last year, is because this is a player that we had never seen before, and you have this kind of excitement that you kind of build around him. And obviously it didn't pan out, and I ate a lot of crow for that. But you get excited because you want to see these skilled type power play specialists come to a team that has never really had that in a while. So maybe that's somewhere that the Kings need to start looking for and kind of get away from a little bit more of that 5v5 play to elevate that scoring and that power play a little bit.
Like somebody like, man, there's this Gabe Velardi guy that is floating around that would have been so good at that. I keep saying that term. But no, I don't know. So those, I know the common names we've talked about: Forsberg from a free agent. We've talked about Marchman as a free agent. Names like Fiala, DeBrusque. So those two that I threw out from Montreal, I was looking for teams that are up against the cap, that maybe there'd be some sort of a fit. Again, I'm not saying I endorse those, but if the Kings see Anderson, if the Kings see Hoffman as fits for what they're looking for potentially. Do you have any other names potentially that we haven't talked about or that aren't kind of being floated around out there that maybe, I mean, Winnipeg's an interesting team to me because I don't know what they're doing this offseason, and I don't know if anybody could be made available from Winnipeg.
That's the team I was actually going toward because they have a really interesting situation coming up this offseason where they have to sign Pierre-Luc Dubois to a new deal. He's going to command a pretty expensive piece. He was the main piece in the Patrick Laine trade, so he's not going to come cheap. Mason Appleton's an RFA. They got some other players that are UFAs, and I believe Logan Stanley, a good defenseman on their back end, as an RFA, and he's a left shot defenseman. So, but the thing, they don't have that much cap space with the amount of players. Blake Wheeler, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, and Mark Scheifele all have deals over $6 million, and they only have 6 forwards signed on a contract right now. So if you're looking for a team to kind of maybe take advantage of a little bit, I mean, Winnipeg's a team to look at because I would love to see a player like Kyle Connor or Nick Ehlers on the Kings, and I think that would be perfect for what the Kings are looking for. Because $6 million too isn't that expensive for those type of players. Kyle Connor just scored 40 goals this year.
Exactly. So, and what
he's on a 4x7-1 is what his contract.
Okay, thank you. Because what I wanted to say is, what did he do before this? And he signs that deal. So this is what we're talking about with Kempe, right? Mm-hmm. Like they signed him maybe a little earlier. That people when they signed that deal, it was like, well, is Kyle Connor worth $6 million for 4 or 5 years? Maybe at the time it was a little bit questionable. But if you are buying that guy to do this for the next X amount of years, that's what the Kings are talking about, looking to do with Kempe. Love it if they could pry one of those wingers from Winnipeg. That would be fantastic. Scheifele, I think they just said they don't plan on trading him. So take that for what it's worth. But
so you look at Connor's stats here. I just threw them up on the screen. Outside the shortened season in 20 and 21, he's a 4-time 30 goal scorer, and he's making 7-1. I mean, that's for another 4 years as well.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're able to get him at that price, but again, probably a tough deal with Western Conference. Sometimes that's a little bit of an issue. I don't know, but I like the shout, Russ.
That's actually
you thinking more than 4 assets at that point
for Connor?
Yeah,
he'd probably be around what Chychrun would cost for sure. Because I mean, you're talking about a multi 30-plus goal scorer. He just scored 47 goals this past year. But I think just to kind of get away from maybe acquiring him, I think like you just talked about with Kempe, I think that's actually a really good comparison because after Connor's first year, he played 20 games, he scored 2 goals. His second year, he played 76 games, scored 31 goals. And then his next year, he scored 34 goals, and that's when he got that big deal. So kind of looking around the same. I mean, when these players produce these goals, when a player like Kempe is going to put up 35 goals in a year, that's not really a fluke. So you can kind of expect this to maybe go forward.
And again, he scored. What did he score in the shortened year? 14, 15 goals. Like he was
28.
No, Kempe.
Oh,
just because he was going to be a 20 goal scorer in the COVID season. Like I don't think we should he had a really good season. He was having a good season in that 2020 season that was cut short or was started late or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. He was putting together not quite a 30 goal season, but he was putting together a pace that was going to get him into the 20s. So I don't want to I get it. Like he didn't score 20, but I think he was well on pace to do so.
Let's see here. I'll do the math here. 14.
Yeah, I'm not a pace guy, so maybe I'm wrong.
14 to 56 and 82. He was on pace for 20 goals.
Perfect.
There we go. So, I think that it's reasonable to think you see in his progression, he gets to, that level of, okay, he gets to 20, then he pushes to 35 now. And to Randon's, what he had said, you give him a consistent centerman, which they finally did with Kopitar. And he didn't do this on a fluke 19% shooting percentage. He's not that far out of his norm, Kempe, in his shooting percentage here this year. So I really do buy into him being, even if it's not 35 every year, a legitimate goal scorer and 30 goal threat every year.
Hey, if the Kings sign Kempe to a 6-year deal and he scores 30 goals every year, I'd take that happily.
Yeah.
Especially with the figure we're kind of floating around at $5.5 million.
If he scores 27 goals, I think I'd be
right. Exactly. I mean, you got to be happy with that production for a team that kind of just desperately needs it. You just have to bring more players that are able to do so.
Yeah.
And we kind of got away from it a little bit, but right now, after we make this hypothetical Chychrun trade, there's only $4 million in cap space, and before that, there was only around $6 million in cap space. So yeah, there's not really that much room to play with. And just to kind of go back to Marchment, let's say we do sign him to that $3.5 million deal. I think that that would be my dream lineup really going into next season. You don't get that really high end sniper type player, but Mason Marchment has been known to has played a really good 5-on-5 game and can put the puck in the net, play that net front type role that the Kings have really needed. Where Rob Blake just got done with an exit interview talking about size pretty much being the one thing that the Kings need. So you bring in a player like Marchment who's 6'4", like 215 who can play that net front role on a power play, and then help out there maybe a little bit, and then play with players like I look at that second line right there, and I love everything about it. I love seeing.
Hard not to.
Yeah, I love Marchment, Deneau, and more. And then maybe you bump Arvidsson up to the first line. But I mean, I'm looking at this lineup right here, and I see a 100+ point team right here. I love everything about this lineup. And how much cap space is there right now?
Well, I bumped the 3.5 to in between 3 and 4, so you'd have 400K.
Yeah, so I mean, and we've kind of gone high on some deals, maybe a little bit, just kind of play it safe. So I mean, maybe the Kings can kind of work a little bit, but you're looking at adding players like Marchment who can help with that forward core, and then you bring in that elite level offensive ability talent on the defense and Chychrun. I think you have to like this offseason from a Kings standpoint.
If that's what they pull, but I think my preference is they go big on the defenseman, because I think that's a bigger need, is that left side D. I really do. Everybody knows that listens to Randon and I on Making It Rain. I'm a big Jacob Moverari fan, but I know Jacob Moverari is not a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. I love him as a depth guy, 6'7" if we can, but and the right side's loaded.
Here, just for you there, Joe.
Thank you. But that left side, if you take Chychrun out of that left side, that's not good. And not to get into a whole other separate discussion here, but that left side is not good enough until they add that. You saw what the Kings are going to have to deal with now. Now we'll see what the Flames do in the offseason. That's an interesting team, but I expect the Flames to be at least a solid team. Edmonton, you're going to have to deal with McDavid and Draisaitl. Vegas is going to be back, everybody. I know we want to dance on their graves, and that's fine. Enjoy it. But like Jack Eichel's here now in this division too. That we need, that left defense is a big deal. So I think that's the priority for me, is the left D. And then if they're able to do, even if they didn't acquire a forward, and this may sound crazy to people, but consider what we just had. The full season of Arthur Kaliev, right? He really had a big year for him. Just to play every day in the NHL in a role was big. Rasmus Kupari getting a lot of time. Maybe Velardi finally gets a look. I think Quentin Byfield will now settle into a role. So I think you could make the argument that could still come from within on the forward side of it. They added Deneau, they added Arvidsson last year. It's time that maybe they say the time is now for the prospects, the Kalievs, the Velardis, the Byfields, Kupari, Fagemo, as Randall points. Maybe the time is now for these guys to add that scoring up and down the lineup and address the defense. Because if you had to bank on it coming from within, it's the forwards. It's not from the defense, at least from the left side.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, if the Kings don't make any moves, let's say that we go into next season and the Kings pretty much bring back all the players. I mean, maybe make a small minor move. I mean, there's only $6 million in cap space. We're kind of having a little fun here with some of the trades that we've made. But I mean, this next season is going to be a season where we look at players like Byfield and Kaliev and say, okay, you've gotten your feet wet a little bit. Now we need to see a little bit more production.
Yep.
So maybe turn Kaliev from a 14 goal scorer to a 18, 20 plus goal scorer. Maybe get 15 plus goals out of Byfield, and maybe pot a few more apples there, here and there. So yeah, and then you hopefully get a good season out of Gabe Velarde. I think Samuel Fagemo is going to be I expect him to be a 20 plus goal scorer in the NHL at some point in his career. So I mean, if the Kings don't make any moves up front, it's time for these prospects or these younger players to take the next step. And maybe that would kind of show them from a management standpoint and be like, hey, we didn't bring anyone in because we know that you guys have the potential to bring in more scoring yourselves. So you get a full season from Arvidsson, Dow. I mean, because really a lot of the offensive lacking of offense that was we saw throughout the season was because you didn't see players like Drew Doughty or Sean Walker, those players who are able to move the puck up ice, kind of help out. And the power play was so horrible. So maybe you can kind of benefit and improve there a little bit and see some more goals coming out of that. So maybe that's the main offseason addition.
I think, and I take because we started to see at times toward the end of the season, McClellan move Kaliev up the lineup a little bit, maybe not consistently, but he played up a little bit. He played on the top power play unit come playoff time. Like I view that as McClellan starting to trust him a little bit more. And I think I believe his comments about our Kaliev were pretty, he needs to have a really good offseason. Like his off-ice stuff now needs to take that next level, that next step. And I think it's a challenge that I think Kaliev could be in for a bigger role next year. I think he earned a lot of trust, I think, from McClellan this season. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a shot higher up in that lineup.
Yeah, and I think with Kaliev, I believe he's back in Miami right now, or already working on his skating. So this is going to be a big offseason for him. And like you just talked about, this season kind of displayed from Kaliev to the coaching staff that he's able. I mean, what was the big knock on him coming out of the draft was that his skating ability and his two-way game. Yep. And he was able to show throughout the season that he's able to play a more defensive role. So, I mean, he was playing fourth line minutes most of the season, but I mean, that line with Lemieux and Lizotte was great. And they were really generating a lot of scoring chances themselves. So if he can elevate his game a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised to see him score 20, 25 plus goals this season.
Yeah, I mean, and if they want to keep that second line together because of how well they played toward the end of last season, the second half of last season, and you can go with a Kempe, Kopitar, and Kaliev line as your top three, I'm in on that. I think it's time to give him a shot. But again, we'll see. So I'm actually like, the more I go through this exercise, I'm given the cap space that we really don't have. If you think about it, I want the defenseman. I definitely want the defenseman, and then time is now for the forward prospects. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. I mean, you look at Fagemo got over 30, was on pace for around 30. You're going to have a guy like Martin Chromiak who's going to be able to come into the AHL. Not that he would crack the lineup for the Kings. And then, with injuries, you're going to see guys take that next step forward. I mean, Akil Thomas improved last season towards the end. You're going to see those guys get those opportunities with injuries and stuff like that. And, what's the point of a prospect pool if you don't play these players at this point? And I think a lot of Kings fans, me included, got excited, right? 99 points, we make the playoffs and all this kind of stuff. And so, we want the same level of jump from the last season that we did this season. Well, that's Western Conference Finals. And I don't think that's maybe realistic based on what we're looking at. And I think you could be seeing a team that maybe, with maybe Anze Kopitar takes a step back in his play and we don't really have a true number one center. Maybe, we have some lower level play here from other players. The goalie situation, Quick's getting older and Cal Peterson hasn't taken that next step. Maybe this team is another, 95, 96 point team. And we do really need the prospect pool to take the next step to eclipse the 100-point mark. And again, don't underestimate. Don't just assume that the Kings made the playoffs and they're going to make the playoffs again next year. Like, that's my hope. That's my goal for them, and that would be my personal expectation. But again, Edmonton's a good team. We're seeing Calgary's going to be strong. Vegas will be back. Like, this is going to be another dogfight in this division. So it's important that the Kings have the ability to take advantage of a lot of these prospects, your Byfields, Kalievs, and Kaparis, on cheap deals. If you can get those guys sprinkled into your lineup to be positive contributors to your lineup on cheap deals, that allows you to go spend some money elsewhere.
Yeah, I think this is a really good exercise, and this is why I wanted to put this together, is just to show Kings fans. I mean, look, we signed all these RFAs, and the Kings only had close to around $6-7 million in cap space. So there's going to be a lot of maneuvering, and this is going to be a really interesting offseason from Rob Blake's point of view to see kind of what he's able to do and what pieces he feels going into the roster next season. Like, I hate to say this because, again, as we're this is going to sound bad. It's not easy. Okay, so I'm just going to preface this, but like, he did kind of the quote unquote the easy part in terms of tearing it down, building it up through the prospects and the draft and the scouting department, and he. Excellent additions. I want to say he made excellent trades with the Muzzin trade, the Campbell trade. He hit home runs with those, the Arvidsson deal. So he's done a lot of really, really good things. And he's now going to take that team and take it to the next level. As Randon said, like, is Western Conference Finals in the next year or two or three? Is that happening? Like,
Now it's Blake got to get this team from, okay, we made the playoffs, to boom. Now I think it was a great question that was asked to pretty much everybody was, what's harder, making that jump from, non-playoff team to playoff team, or playoff team to contender? And I would argue it's playoff team to contender, because I think you build up a good prospect pool. If you have a good scouting staff, you have a good, which the Kings obviously do have one of the better ones, it's not crazy to see them. Not to mention you still have, a couple of core studs and Kopitar and Doughty and the way Quick played. So like you still had some pieces to really kind of drive the bus here. Blake has done a really good job so far. Can he get the team to the next level? And that's the fun part, right? That's what we'll see.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. It's just when you're rebuilding, you're already at the rock bottom. So now that the Kings have really made this kind of jump, they're at this new plateau, and it's like, where do you go from here at that point? You can go back down, but you want to go back up. You want to keep going up. So yeah, exactly. So you can't just you have to make the right moves. So, and you don't want to head back down to that rock bottoms part again. We want to see the Kings keep that trajectory, keep going up.
Not anytime soon.
All right, guys. Well, it's been a wonderful episode. You guys can find us at hockeyroyalty.com. Articles coming out every single day. We're going to be doing a lot of interviews this summer. Like I said, we just wrapped up the Scott Wheeler interview this morning. That'll be posted tomorrow to YouTube and podcasts. You can find Russell, Joe, and I at our Twitter handles that have been scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Russell, do you have anything to add?
No, it's just I'm ready for the offseason. The playoffs have been a fun kind of caveat for us while we're all waiting. That game on Tuesday was outstanding. Yeah. So I've enjoyed the playoffs. I hope you guys have too. But it's funny because the last day, I think the last possible day for the Stanley Cup final is June 30th, and the NHL draft is July 7th. So buckle up. As soon as the season's over, we're right back into it. So it should be fun.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks. We had a lot of people with questions and comments and stuff. I know we didn't get to all of them, but really appreciate you guys listening, tuning in, asking questions, commenting, and reading our stuff. And it's awesome. Love it. So really, really appreciate the interaction, guys.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. And go Kings, go.
Go Kings. Go Kings.